All right, this I'm actually going to be introducing Chapter 8, and Chapter 8 and 9 and 10 are connected. They are about metabolism. Chapter 8 and 9 will be on the midterm. Chapter 10 will not. Chapter 10 is about photosynthesis in plants, and so it's about metabolism in the process of photosynthesis, but it won't be on the midterm. What we're going to deal with here is Chapter 8 introduces the principles of cellular energetics, and that's what we're really especially interested in learning about in this first course in biology is the energy involved in cellular metabolism. Then Chapter 9 involves cellular respiration, and that's a process that eukaryotic cells, so plants, animals, and single-celled eukaryotes like yeast, use to get energy. And so this is a way that we burn calories. And so metabolism chapters are about burning calories, and that includes that process of digestion and metabolism and burning the calories that are in the foods we eat. And so this chapter is about that kind of metabolism, and it's all down at the cellular level because ultimately, fundamentally, that's where we burn calories is the individual cell, and it involves chemical reactions. And so in our course, we define chemical reaction as when covalent bonds get broken and formed. And so we'll see examples of that. We've already said that carbon always wants to form 4 covalent bonds. However, it can change who it's sharing those bonds with. So it could change around from sharing bonds with hydrogen to sharing bonds with carbon dioxide. And it turns out that this is lower energy. And this is carbon dioxide, which we're exhaling. And we're exhaling carbon dioxide because we rearrange the covalent bonds in the carbon we eat, like in sugars. And that sugar is at a higher energy level than the carbon dioxide. And so we're going to release energy in the form of caloric energy to do work and to synthesize other molecules that we need, like proteins and DNA and phospholipids like that. And in doing so, the foods we digest get there's some energy released from them by rearranging these covalent bonds. Carbon still has 4 covalent bonds, but how they're organized differs. So as we define a chemical reaction, just in a pure cup of water, chemical reactions are occurring. And when we usually think about chemical reactions, we think about energy changing. Either the reaction is releasing energy or it requires energy, and that's not happening significantly in this water. In water, these molecules are shifting their covalent bonds, but they're all equivalent. So this oxygen decides to form a covalent bond with this hydrogen that it had a non-covalent interaction with, and suddenly decides to form a covalent bond with that. And in doing so, this hydrogen over here is at the same time deciding to form a covalent bond with this oxygen, and this oxygen is deciding to form a covalent bond with this hydrogen. So there's a lot of this dance between these water molecules, and ultimately it's still just water, and there isn't an increase or decrease in energy like that in the cup of water. So it's kind of interesting that we've already seen chemical reactions take place. And here's the bottom line for a chemical reaction, and that is that this water is very stable. This water molecule is very stable when it's in isolation. When we bring other water molecules into the neighborhood, they're attracted to each other because of the polar covalent bond, and the presence of other water molecules destabilizes the water molecule because it gives an opportunity for these atoms to form covalent bonds with other partners like that. And so that's a really significant idea, is that covalent bonds are stable unless alternatives are provided. And that's a huge factor we'll see in the story of life. So In the story of cellular metabolism, we have two types of metabolism occurring, and one is where energy is released, catabolism, like in the digesting of food, and one is where we synthesize the molecules we need, like, for example, when our body needs to make aquaporin. It's going to take energy to make aquaporin. Aquaporin is an energy-requiring process to synthesize it. And so we have catabolism and anabolism. And here's an example of some catabolism. Here's table sugar. And the first step in digesting table sugar is a chemical reaction where this oxygen covalent bonds are rearranged. And so here's the oxygen here, and see what's happened is a water molecule came in. We can even draw this. A water molecule came in and contributed some alternative binding possibilities. And so water was added to split this sucrose disaccharide into two monosaccharides, like that. And this process is called hydrolysis. Lysis means to cut, and hydro, water. And hydrolysis is how protein polymers get the first step in their degradation or digestion, and also DNA and RNA are polymers that are long chains of monomers held together, and those are broken too. So this hydrolysis is a common step in all of these macromolecules in their beginning of their digestion or degradation during catabolism. Here's an example of a chemical reaction that you'd already be familiar with. It's wood burning in a fire. And in chemistry, we draw a chemical reaction like this, where we go from reactants. In chemistry, they're referred to as reactants. In biology, we call those S or substrate, going through this chemical reaction to a product. And so when we burn wood, we're going to require oxygen, and the wood is going to release carbon dioxide and water vapor. It turns out that the wood is mostly burning cellulose, and cellulose happens to be a long polymer, a polysaccharide made up of polymers of the monomer glucose. And we just saw that glucose is part of sucrose, and it turns out that our bodies also burn a lot of glucose. And so in the process, we go from a high energy glucose down to carbon dioxide, and we exhale carbon dioxide like I already mentioned, and the exact same chemical reaction is happening in the fire. So there's going to be a big difference, though, in that we're going to capture this energy and use it to do work, like to contract our muscles and to synthesize molecules. In the fire, it's typically lost as heat, like that. So chemical reactions are going to be often energy releasing, like that. And so the next thing is that in chemical reactions, there always is a forward reaction and then a complementary reverse reaction, like this. And scientists will draw the arrow to sort of indicate how strong a reaction it is. In this case, it's very much a forward reaction, right? Lots of energy is released, like that. Good first question to think about is, yeah, this is wood. These trees in the forest don't just spontaneously catch fire, though. So it's interesting. There's a lot of energy released, but it's not released spontaneously. There's a block to that spontaneous, like in the same way that water would like to flow downhill, but it can't if it's in a bucket. Somehow the cellulose glucose is held in a bucket. And the book shows diagrams of, in Chapter 8, about the idea of spontaneous energy release. We already talked about this, about water or a diver going downhill from a higher potential energy to a lower potential energy, terms from physics. And the process releases kinetic energy, and we can measure that energy in the form of the units are calories. In the case of biochemistry, it's calories per mole. So a substance like glucose can release a certain number of calories per mole, like in your diet. Here's a really, or calories per mole, or the other unit is joules per mole, which is a unit from physics. Joule is a measure of work, like lifting an object up onto a table. Something interesting about this is that you can see here that this diver started at certain energy, certain height, and dropped to this height. And we'll see that, for example, when we burn calories, they could be from eating sugar. And we know that already. We know something, and that is fats have a higher amount of calories than sugar. So we can already start imagining that with a fat, for a mole, a certain amount of fat, the diver starts at a higher level and drops further. More energy is released from a mole of fats than a mole of sugars, and we know that from our own diets. Okay, so what's shown here is that this is a kind of physical world spontaneous change, and we're down at the cellular molecular level, and these are the two changes that are really important for us to learn about in biological chemistry. This one is a little bit harder to understand, but this is more organized than this, and this will spontaneously lead to this, and in doing so, energy will be released. I think I kept here's this figure that we talked about briefly in the chapter in osmosis. And we start out with this, and if there's a higher concentration of these guys on this side than that side, and if these guys can't cross the membrane, water will diffuse at a higher rate in this direction than that direction, and actually raise the water on this side. And you know, when water is raised up above the other level, that water is now available to do work, like water behind a dam. You can let the water flow downhill and do work. And so it appears like work must have been done to get the water lifted up. But actually what's going on here is that principle that these concentrated molecules relative to these are actually a potential energy, a way of storing energy, storing the capacity to work. And this flow of water is a type of kinetic energy. So that's the more kind of obscure example of energy in cellular systems. This is the more common, where we just talked about sugar and fats, that the molecule itself, in the organization of the covalent bonds it has, holds the energy and as a potential energy that can be released spontaneously like water flowing downhill. Okay, that's that. Then the next thing to say is that in the process of cellular metabolism, there's a blizzard of molecules and steps. So each one of these is a chemical reaction with a substrate and a product in each case. And what's going on here is that in the wood fire, the chemical reaction in burning wood drops the energy abruptly, and it's released as heat. The same chemical reaction happens in our bodies, but happens as a series of steps in a more controlled reaction, and in some cases energy is released. In some of these steps, energy is released, and we'll learn about this energy, and that's what's being kept track of here, is that during this cellular metabolism, this is part of the step of burning glucose, and so instead of burning glucose in a fire in the form of cellulose, boom, lots of heat released. This happens in our body. It happens actually inside the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are a source of metabolism, location of metabolism, and this is one of the big steps that happens in there, the citric acid cycle that we'll learn about in chapter 9. And it's just a first preview that there'll be lots of steps, and we don't have to memorize all these factors. A big focus here is the flow of energy, like that, through biological systems. So that's that, and the book shows it like this, where you could have water dropping a big level, or you could have a series of drops with the opportunity to capture energy at multiple steps. So this is what life is like, and this is what a fire is like. And we'll see in chapter 8 that this graph is shown and used a lot of times, and we'll talk about that at the start of the next mini lecture.